For the purpose of this video, I'm going to make a very crazy assumption. I'm going to make the assumption that the timeline proposed in young Earth creationism is correct. Or in other words, the Earth is only about 6,000 years old. Now, let's look at human beings. Human beings tend to procreate before they are 30 years old. That certainly would have been the case in older days. But also, we have to realize that infant mortality used to be quite high, certainly up to the start of last century. So it is fair enough to say that quite a few children died before they got a chance to procreate. Add to that people who just don't procreate, and people who don't procreate before they get to the correct age. It certainly isn't an unreasonable assumption to state that on average a person would have about 9 in 10 chance of surviving to produce a next generation. In actual fact, that would have been quite an exaggeration. The chances weren't nearly as good as that for the large majority of human history. So, let's now look at your ancestors, starting with Adam. Adam, therefore, would have a 0.9% chance of surviving. Like I said before, most people would reproduce before they were 30, definitely in the olden days. How many generations does that mean, therefore? Well, 200 generations in the 6,000 years that apparently have passed since the creation of the earth by God himself. So the chances, therefore, that all your ancestors survived in order to produce the next ancestor are this. You take the 0.9 and take it to the power of 200, and the result is this. That's a 0 followed by, sorry, I'm not thinking straight, but it's about 9 or 10 zeros, and then a 7 and some other numbers. Okay? It's a ridiculously small number. It's in the order of 1 in a billion. Now, what would be a really silly thing to do after that calculation? I'll tell you what. The silly thing to do would be to say, you can't possibly exist because the chances of you actually existing are less than 1 billion to 1. You have better chances of winning the lottery. I mean, it is pretty obvious what's wrong with that line of reasoning, if you think about it. The line of reasoning is based on harping on about what the expectation of any of your ancestors procreating was when they were born. But that argument is null and void. The point is moot for the very simple reason that your ancestor doesn't have to worry about whether or not they are going to procreate. Your ancestor has procreated, and so has every one of your ancestors, right up to you personally. I don't know whether you have kids. If you don't, then in your case there is still a question open. But for your ancestors, there's no point in arguing. They have procreated and they have produced you. You see, the big fallacy in this line of reasoning is making the assumption that somehow there was an aim in the universe to produce you now, at this point in time. And then, of course, the likelihood of that actually happening and the universe succeeding in producing you now is astronomical, and you might sit there scratching your head thinking like, how could it possibly have happened? But of course, that's nonsense. Every one of your ancestors had a 0.9% chance, 0.9 chance, it's a 90% chance of producing offspring just like every one of their contemporaries had. And of their contemporaries, 90% managed to procreate, 10% didn't. Every time. And like I said in the start of the video, I'm actually exaggerating those chances because they weren't nearly as good as that. But let's not nitpick. So, if it hadn't been for this lucky sequence of events and this lucky chain of ancestors that produced you, then another lucky chain of ancestors would have produced other people to be alive today. And that is a fallacy that anybody who is even remotely open-minded can easily understand and verify for themselves. Well, the thing is, the very same fallacy applies to the theory of evolution, and anybody who might argue that things cannot have evolved because of the unlikelihood of them evolving the way they have. Well, the thing is, they have evolved the way they have. And if they hadn't, they would have evolved differently, and the world would have looked very different now. But it's not an argument that can be used validly against evolution. Thank you.